Now, the first known system of taxation was in ancient Egypt, around 3000 BC to 2800 BC. That is before Christ. So in biblical times, tax was already prevalent. What does this mean? It means that tax, as you see it today, is not a new thing. Indeed, there's no new thing on this earth. All that we are seeing are things we have seen before. So those of you who are Christians, when you open your Bible to Genesis chapter 47 to 24, it reads that, but when the crops come in, give a fifth of it to Pharaoh, the other for fifth you may keep as seed for the fields and as food for yourselves and your households and your children. Indeed, some people interpret the payment of tithe, which is 1/10 of your income, as a form of tax. You get it? And it is a case that in the Christian organization, these revenues were supposed to go to support a group of people, including the Levites. Remember, if those of you who are Christians, for example, when Moses was sharing the land to the 12 tribes of Israel, the Levites did not get land, or they were not given land. And land was the main source of food and income. And so if they were not given land, then there should be another mechanism to ensure that they are remunerated for the services they were providing to the Israel, right? And so they thought that it would be appropriate that the other 11 tribes would pay a tithe to the Levite clan, so that they would also have food to eat, and then they would also be sustained to perform the services that they have been charged to perform. But besides the Levites, it is also the case that there were certain groups of people who were underprivileged and needed to be catered for. So the poor people, the widows, orphans, you get it, and even the sick, were people, the tithe that the other tribes were paying to the Levites were also supposed to cater for. You get it? So there is some religious foundation to the tithe, to the taxes we pay today. You get it? And in Ghana, I believe it's a major source of revenue to the churches. When you think about tithe and other forms of revenues, other sources of revenues to the church. So the interesting thing is that the first system of tax can be traced to Egypt. Now, what do you think is the history of taxation in Ghana? What do you think is the history of taxation in Ghana? For this, I will leave it for you to do some research on that, and then we'll discuss that when we meet again. Okay, so let's move on to look at the purpose of taxation. And there are four main purposes of taxation, which we refer to as the 4 R's of taxation. Okay, so the government taxes or levies taxation, one, to generate revenue, as we indicated earlier on. And this revenue is supposed to be spent on the provision of infrastructure and other services to the citizens of the country. Now, the government also taxes to redistribute resources. So, for example, there are taxes like wealth taxes, which is taxes, or which are taxes on the wealthy and the rich. And then that revenue is redistributed to the poor. So when the government taxes the rich and use that to provide services to the poor, the government is engaged in a process called income redistribution. And so taxation helps in that process. Now, the government also taxes to reprice goods and services. And usually the government will do this to discourage or encourage the consumption of these goods or services. Let me give you an example. An example is what is referred to as sin taxes, which are levied on harmful goods like cigarette or tobacco-based goods and alcohol. Okay, so it is believed that these tobacco-based goods and alcohol are detrimental to the human body when consumed in excess. So to discourage excessive consumption of these goods, the government imposes what is called a sin tax, just to discourage people from consuming more and more of that good. Okay, that's one of them. And then the fourth, but not the least, purpose of taxation is for representation. So the point is that when you appoint people to represent you, they may incur administrative expenditures. So for example, at the department level, there's a club, LAMSA. And LAMSA is supposed to provide services to the student population of the department. Now, how does LAMSA undertake those services or provide those services? LAMSA must tax the members of the association to be able to do that. That is how come you end up paying some levy to LAMSA for its activities. So at the national level, we see this idea of representation also, that the government represents the citizens, and the government is expected to provide certain services to the citizens. And for the government to be able to do that, it must tax the citizens to be able to do that. Okay. Yeah, so the four purposes of taxation can be represented as the 4 R's, and they are revenue, redistribution, repricing, and representation. Now let's turn our attention to some basic concepts of taxation. So the first concept I'd like to introduce you to, and it's important you take note of this because I'll use them quite often. It will help you appreciate the calculation section of the course, okay? So the first one is what is called the tax base. The tax base. And the tax base is the measure or the value upon which tax is levied. An example of a tax base is taxable income. You get it? So your income is a tax base, is a measure or is a basis for taxation. You get it? It could also be your asset. So the value of, say, a property you own. Or it could be the value of capital gains you have made from the sale of an asset. You get it? So the tax base is that basis upon which tax is charged. The second concept we should take note of is the tax rate. The tax rate. Now, the tax rate is the percentage rate applied to the tax base, okay? The tax rate is the percentage rate applied to the tax base. So let me give you an example. If your taxable income, or if the tax base is your taxable income, and the taxable income is 5,000, the tax rate is a percentage of that income. Okay, and so say the government may say, okay, for this category of income, you are supposed to pay 10% on this income. So in this case, you are supposed to pay 10% on an income of 5,000. So the 10% here represents the tax rate. The 5,000 represents the taxable income. And there are 3 types of tax rates you should take note of. There are 3 types of tax rate. We have what is called the marginal tax rate. And the marginal tax rate is the tax rate you pay on any additional income you earn. Okay? The marginal tax rate is the tax rate you pay on additional income you earn. So if your income is 2,000 and you earn 2,000 extra income, then you may be charged a marginal tax rate on the extra 2,000 income you earn. There's also what is called the average tax rate. The average tax rate. And the average tax rate is the total amount of tax you pay divided by your total income. Okay. So let's say, for example, you pay 1,000 in taxes and your income is 10,000. Okay, so you pay 1,000 in taxes and your total income is 10,000. Now the average tax rate can be computed by dividing the total amount of tax, which is the 1,000, by the total income of 10,000. And that will give you the average tax rate. And then there is what is called the effective tax rate. The effective tax rate is the total tax liability divided by the total economic income. So your total tax liability divided by the total economic income. So we'll come to this later on, and that concept will become much clearer as we move on. Any questions so far on the purpose of taxation and the basic concepts of taxation? Okay. Now we can also classify tax into different things. So there are at least 3 main classifications of taxation. You have what is called progressive tax, and you have regressive tax, and then proportional tax. Now, progressive tax refers to the way the tax rate progresses from low to high, with the return that the taxpayer's average tax rate is less than the person's marginal tax rate. Now, this is what that means. It means that the higher your income, you pay more in taxes. That is what a progressive tax means. Okay. In other words, your tax rate increases as the taxable amount increases. I'll show you examples of this tomorrow when we meet. Okay. But just have that at the back of your mind. Now, with regressive taxation, we say that this type of tax is the opposite of progressive tax. It is so because with regressive tax, you pay more when your income is less. Okay, an example is that the poor pay more in taxes than the rich, who have a higher level of income. And then proportional tax means that people pay the same percentage of tax on their incomes, irrespective of the income they earn. Okay, So a very good example of a proportional tax is sales tax and poll tax. We'll look at these later on. So a good question for assessment is compare and contrast these types of taxes. That's a very good question for either MISM or exams or even a quiz. Compare and contrast these three types of taxes. So let's have a look at the poll tax in particular. The poll tax in particular. And I'm looking at religious sources of the poll tax. So when you think of Jewish and Christian law, as prescribed in Exodus chapter 30, verse 11 to 16, Jewish law imposed a poll tax of half shekel payable by every man above the age of 20. So the rich shall not pay more and the poor shall not pay more. So as I indicated, the poll tax is an example of a proportional tax. And the word poll actually means head. So it is a form of a head tax. It is imposed irrespective of the income. You get it? And that is why the rich and the poor pay the same amount. And usually it is imposed on adults. So according to Jewish law, if you are about 20 years and above, you will be considered as an adult. So you pay a poll tax. And that money was designated for the tabernacle, as you see in Exodus, okay? And it was also meant for the upkeep of the temple of Jerusalem. So the priests, the women, the slaves, and minors were exempted from the payment of these taxes. But then they could offer it voluntarily if they wanted to pay this type of tax. Now, the Samaritans and the Gentiles were rejected or were prevented from paying this tax. That is where. Now, you can also find a reference to poll taxes in Sharia and Islamic law as well. So in Islam or Sharia law, there's what is called the Zakat al-Fitr, which is an obligatory charity that must be given by every Muslim or their guardian near the end of every Ramadan. Okay. And the amount is 2 kilograms of wheat or barley or its cash equivalent. And Muslims in dire poverty are exempt from it. And the point is that the Zakat al-Fitr is to be given to the poor in society. So you can see that there's a form of redistribution here. Remember when we said that one of the purposes of taxation is redistribution of income from the rich to the poor. So the Zakat al-Fitr is to be given to the poor. So the rich give to the poor. And then also this Zakat al-Fitr, a form of it or a variation of it called jizya is also imposed on non-Muslims living in Arabic or Muslim dominated countries, okay, or Muslim states. And it is a form of tax that these non-Muslims pay in exchange for the protection they enjoy under the state. Okay, so it's basically an obligation of these non-Muslims to the state, Islamic State. So you can trace poll taxes in various countries. So when you think of Great Britain, poll taxes started somewhere in 1275. In Canada, it was about 1885, France 1695, New Zealand in the 19th century. And then in the United States, you have the mid 20th century. You get it. So for those of you who want to read more on this, these are some of the sources you can look at. You can trace poll taxes to these years across these countries. Okay. So I think this brings us to the end of today's lecture. Do you have any question so far on what I've treated today?
Sir,
yes, let's hear you.
Sir, please, with the poll tax, is it still currently practiced?
It's practiced in other countries. In Ghana, we don't necessarily have a poll tax regime. But you will realize that when you go to the district assembly level, there might be some form of tax that might look like a poll tax. Like, for example, I'm sure your parents would have told you of the window tax. In local parlance, it's called the To tax or so. It was levied on anyone who had a window. So if you had a house which had a window, you paid a poll tax. Yeah, and it's irrespective of whether you are rich or poor. But at some point in time, we removed that type of tax from our system. Yeah. Are you okay?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay. If there are no questions, then I have a very small assignment for you. I want you to read on the history of taxation in Ghana. So go to the library, go online, and find out about the history of taxation in Ghana. I'll ask, or we'll discuss this tomorrow when we meet. Okay? Okay, so if there's no other question, then we'll call it a day and meet tomorrow. Is that okay?
Yes, please, sir.
Okay,
Yes,
so
sir.
I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.